The moment Jack Brennan heard the name Ross Cullum, everything changed. Because if what Britt Westbourne said was true, then the man running the WSB wasn't protecting the world. He was betraying it. And now Brennan and Josslyn Jacks might be the only people who know the truth. But exposing Ross Cullum won't be easy. Because if the WSB director realizes they're coming after him, they won't just lose the mission. They'll lose their lives. It started with a quiet conversation that Brennan never expected to take seriously. Dr. Britt Westbourne had information, dangerous information. At first, Brennan assumed it was another bluff. Britt had a reputation for playing games. But this time she wasn't smiling. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. And then she said the words that made Brennan freeze. Ross Cullum was a double agent. Not just bending rules, not secretly working an angle. No. According to Britt, the powerful WSB director had been secretly collaborating with two of the most dangerous names in the intelligence world. Jens Sidwell and Cesar Faison. Brennan didn't believe it. Not at first. Ross Cullum was one of the most respected figures inside the Bureau. A man known for discipline, precision, and loyalty. But Britt didn't hesitate. She laid out everything she knew. Cullum had been secretly assisting Sidwell on something called Faison's final project. No one knew exactly what that project was. But if Faison had designed it, the consequences would be catastrophic. Britt leaned closer to Brennan and lowered her voice. She warned him that both Cullum and Sidwell were extremely dangerous. Men who eliminated problems quickly. And quietly. That warning lingered in Brennan's mind long after Britt walked away. Because if she was telling the truth, then the WSB had been compromised from the inside. And the man responsible was sitting at the very top. Brennan didn't panic. He didn't confront anyone. Instead, he made a phone call. A very careful phone call. To another WSB director. Not in Port Charles. Not in the United States. Belgium. Brennan trusted her, or at least he hoped he could. He asked for a favor. A very specific favor. He wanted Ross Cullum's expense reports. Every itinerary. Every travel record. For the last 3 years. And then Brennan said something that made the request even more suspicious. He asked her to keep it secret. Completely secret. No one else inside the Bureau could know he was digging. Not yet. Not until he knew exactly what he was dealing with. Because if Cullum really was a traitor, then every second mattered. After that call, Brennan knew exactly who he needed to speak to next. Josslyn Jacks. When Joss arrived, Brennan didn't waste time. He told her the truth. Or at least the dangerous part of it. Ross Cullum might be a double agent. Josslyn stared at him. The words didn't immediately register. Cullum, the WSB director. The man who had access to every classified operation. If that was true, then the entire intelligence network could already be compromised. Brennan watched Joss closely. He knew she was smart, sharp, but she was also still new to this world. And the truth was, he still felt guilty about pulling her into it. Josslyn Jacks had once been a college student with a normal life. Now she was a WSB agent. And that transformation had started because of him. Brennan had manipulated her, guided her, pushed her into joining the Bureau. At the time, he told himself it was necessary. Joss had the instincts, the intelligence, the courage. But even now, a part of Brennan wondered if he had made a mistake. Because the deeper Joss went into this world, the more danger surrounded her. And this time, the danger had a name. Ross Cullum. Brennan looked Joss directly in the eyes. And then he delivered the warnings. If Cullum finds out that we're onto him, he will have us both killed. The room went silent. No dramatic music. No sudden movement. Just the quiet realization that they were standing on the edge of something deadly. Joss didn't panic. She asked the question any agent would ask. Do we have proof? Brennan shook his head. Not yet. But he was working on it. Those expense reports from Belgium could reveal everything. Secret meetings, unexplained travel, connections to Sidwell, maybe even traces of Faison's mysterious final project. But there was another reason Brennan believed they still had an advantage. Cullum didn't know about Josslyn's. At least Brennan hoped he didn't. Josslyn's WSB status had been kept extremely quiet, almost completely off the record. Very few people inside the bureau knew she had been recruited. And Brennan intended to keep it that way. Because if Cullum believed Joss was just another civilian, she could get close to him. Close enough to expose the truth. Joss listened carefully. But something about Brennan's confidence didn't sit right. Because when you deal with someone like Ross Cullum, assuming anything can be dangerous. And there was one problem Brennan might not have considered. Joss had already crossed paths with Cullum. More than once. The memory came rushing back. The night of the Port Charles snowstorm. The massive blizzard that shut down the entire city. That night Joss had been on a mission. She had tried to infiltrate Windermere, the old Spoon Island mansion. Her plan had been simple. Cut the power lines, slip inside, and search for information. But the moment she entered the mansion, she wasn't alone. Ross Cullum was there. He claimed he was just a Spoon Island worker. A maintenance guy. Someone checking the property during the storm. Joss didn't believe him. But she played along. She told him she had been heading to a party on another island. A blackout party. The storm forced her boat off course. And somehow she ended up at Windermere. The story was ridiculous. Both of them knew it. But neither one pushed the conversation further. They simply watched each other. Two strangers. Both lying. Both pretending. And eventually they walked away. But now Joss wondered something terrifying. What if Cullum investigated after that night? What if he checked surveillance cameras? Because the truth was cameras were everywhere. Especially at places like Windermere. And even before that, there was the Five Poppies Resort. The place where Joss had been held captive. A room with cameras. Hallways with surveillance. Security footage everywhere. If Cullum had access to that footage, he might already know exactly who she was. A WSB agent. Working secretly inside Port Charles. If that was the case, then Brennan's biggest advantage didn't exist. Because Cullum would already be watching her. Waiting. Waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And that wasn't the only danger. Because Brennan had made another risky move. That phone call to Belgium. The WSB director he contacted was someone he trusted. But in the world of espionage, trust is fragile. What if she wasn't loyal? What if she was working with Cullum? If that happened, Brennan's investigation would be exposed immediately. Cullum would know someone was digging into his past. And if Cullum discovered it was Brennan and Joss, they wouldn't have time to react. Because men like Ross Cullum don't hesitate. They eliminate threats. Fast, quiet, permanent. Right now, Brennan and Joss believed they were preparing a trap. But there was a very real possibility that they were the ones walking straight into it. And somewhere out there, Ross Cullum might already know exactly what they're planning. Waiting patiently. Watching every move. Ready to strike the moment they make one mistake. But the real question is this. Is Ross Cullum truly unaware of their investigation? Or has he been letting them get closer on purpose? Josslyn Jacks couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Brennan believed Ross Cullum had no idea she was a WSB agent. But the more Joss thought about it, the less sense that theory made. Ross Cullum wasn't careless. He wasn't sloppy. He was known across the intelligence community as one of the most meticulous operatives alive. A man who noticed everything. Every detail. Every inconsistency. Every threat. So how could someone like that completely miss Josslyn Jacks? The answer was simple. He probably didn't. Which meant something far more dangerous was happening. Cullum might already know. He might already understand exactly who Joss is. And what she's doing. And if that was true, then everything Brennan believed was wrong. Because they weren't secretly investigating Ross Cullum. They were being watched. The thought sent a chill down Joss's spine. But instead of panicking, she focused. That was one thing Brennan had drilled into her from the very beginning. Fear makes agents sloppy. Control the fear. Use it. Joss looked at Brennan across the room. He was still studying the situation like a chess player analyzing the board. Brennan believed they still had the upper hand. But Joss wasn't convinced. She reminded him about the snowstorm. About Windermere. About the night she ran into Cullum inside the mansion. Brennan listened carefully. His expression shifted slightly. Because the moment Joss finished describing that encounter, he realized something troubling. Cullum had lied to her. Claimed he was a maintenance worker. That alone proved he was hiding something. But the bigger question was this. Why was the director of the WSB secretly wandering around Windermere during a blizzard? That didn't sound like routine business. That sounded like someone protecting a secret. And if Cullum had seen Joss that night, he might have already begun investigating her. Which meant he might already know everything. Her identity. Her recruitment. Her connection to Brennan's. Brennan rubbed his jaw slowly. Thinking. Calculating. Because if Cullum had uncovered Josslyn's WSB status, then this entire situation had just become far more dangerous. Still, there was no turning back now. The investigation had already started. The call to Belgium had been made. Soon those records would arrive. Expense reports. Travel logs. 3 years of data. If Cullum had been secretly working with Gent Sidwell, there would be traces. Meetings. Payments. Trips that didn't match official missions. All Brennan had to do was find the pattern. And once he had proof, Ross Cullum would fall. At least that was the plan. But Joss asked the question Brennan had been avoiding. What if the director in Belgium warns him? The room went quiet again. Because that possibility was very real. In espionage, loyalty is never guaranteed. The woman Brennan contacted might truly be trustworthy. Or she might already be part of Cullum's network. If she alerted him, Cullum would know someone had requested his financial records. That alone would trigger alarm bells. And Cullum wasn't the kind of man who waited around once he sensed danger. He would act fast. Joss leaned forward slightly. Then she said something that made Brennan pause. Maybe we should assume he already knows. It was a simple sentence. But it changed everything. Because if they planned their next move assuming Cullum was clueless, they could walk straight into an ambush. But if they acted like he was already aware, they might survive. Brennan studied Joss for a long moment. In that moment he saw something that made him both proud and uneasy. She had fully become an agent. Not the college student he first recruited. Not Carly Spencer's daughter. But someone capable of thinking like an operative. Calculating risk. Anticipating danger. And preparing for the worst. Still, that transformation carried a heavy cost. Because once someone enters this world, there is no easy way out. Brennan knew that better than anyone's. And he still carried guilt over bringing Joss into it. He had promised himself he would keep her safe. But safety didn't really exist anymore. Not when Ross Cullum was involved. Not when Gent Sidwell was lurking somewhere in the shadows. And definitely not when César Fayson's mysterious final project was still out there. That project worried Brennan the most. Because Fayson had spent decades designing chaos. Every scheme he built was layered. Complicated. Devastating. If Sidwell had inherited Fayson's final plan, then Cullum's involvement could mean something massive was coming. Something global. Something catastrophic. And Brennan and Joss might be the only people standing in its way. But first they needed proof. Without proof, accusing the director of the WSB would be suicide. No one would believe them. Cullum had powers, influence, connections everywhere. If they made the wrong moves, they would disappear. And the world would never know why. Joss understood that. So she focused on the next step. They needed to watch Cullum, study him, track his movements, find the moment when he slips. Because even the most careful spy makes mistakes. Eventually, the challenge was staying alive long enough to see it happen. Brennan agreed. But there was another complication. If Cullum suspected Joss, he might try to use her, manipulate her, feed her false information. Or worse, he might eliminate her before she gets too close. Brennan didn't say those words out loud. But the thought was there. Heavy, unavoidable. Joss noticed the silence. And she understood what Brennan was thinking. So she said something that surprised him. If Cullum is watching me, maybe we use that. Brennan looked at her sharply. Joss continued. If Cullum believes he has the advantage, he'll get comfortable. And comfortable people make mistakes. Maybe they could turn the situation around. Let Cullum think he was controlling the board, while they quietly gathered evidence behind the scenes. It was risky. Extremely risky. But in the world of espionage, sometimes the only way to defeat a predator is to let him believe you're the prey. Brennan leaned back slowly, considering the idea. He had trained dozens of agents over the years, but very few had instincts like Josslyn Jacks. Still, the more capable she became, the more dangerous the missions would become. And this one was already deadly. Because Ross Cullum wasn't just any target. He was the director of the WSB. A man with unlimited resources. Unlimited reach. And if Britt Westbourne was telling the truth, he was also working with Gent Sidwell. Which meant this wasn't just an internal investigation anymore. It was a war inside the intelligence world. Brennan finally spoke. Quietly, carefully. If we do this, there's no turning back. Joss didn't hesitate. There never was. Brennan nodded slowly. Then he picked up his phone again. Because somewhere in Belgium, a message was about to arrive. 3 years of Ross Cullum's secrets. 3 years of hidden movements. 3 years of possible betrayal. If the evidence confirmed Britt's story, the fallout would shake the entire WSB. But at that exact same moment, in another part of the world, a man might already be reading a very different message. A message warning him that Jack Brennan had started digging. And if Ross Cullum had just discovered the truth, then Brennan and Joss weren't planning an operation anymore. They were running out of time. Because once Cullum realizes who's investigating him, he won't argue. He won't defend himself. He won't even hesitate. He'll simply eliminate the problem. And the real question now is, when Ross Cullum makes his move, will Brennan and Joss be ready for it? Or have they already stepped into a trap they can't escape?